I will go ahead and introduce Shannon and we will take it from there. Shannon O'Toole is a certified health coach who has a bachelor's in health science, a master's of physical therapy, and has worked as a physical therapist for 15 years before switching to health coaching full-time in 2024. In 2021, she was diagnosed with thyroid nodules, one suspicious of cancer, and later that year had a hemorrhage from a sporadic CCM in her right temporal lobe. These events led to her pursuing additional certifications as a certified nutritional physical therapist, a functional medicine certified health coach, and a precision nutrition L1 certified coach to help educate
That's right.
herself and others on making lasting diet and lifestyle changes to support health and wellness. I realize I did not introduce myself, so I will do that. I'm Darla Clayton. I am the Patient Affairs Director for the Alliance to Cure Cavernous Malformation. And I am very pleased that we have Shannon here tonight, so I will pass it over to her without further ado. Thanks, Shannon.
Well, thank you, Darla. And thanks for taking your time to put all of this together. Just so everyone knows, Darla's over there working hard and sending me messages late at night to get all this organized. And I also just really appreciate everything that the Alliance to Cure does. We had some awesome movement forward with some guidelines, and it's really helped me personally on my journey. So I just say thank you for that. So I'm glad to be here, and hopefully, I can share some information that I learned along the way with other people. So I know it can be quite a learning journey, we'll say, when you have something like this.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I forgot to mention the Q&A. So we do have a Q&A feature. We'd appreciate it if you put your questions there. That's my cat. Instead of in the chat. If you put them in the chat, we probably won't see them. And you can feel free to use the chat, though, to just talk amongst yourselves while Shannon is discussing and sharing her slides. And then at the end, after we're all done, we will have our regular Thursday support group. So I will share the link to that at the end of the meeting. And hopefully you can hop over there and join us there too. All right, now I'm done talking. Go ahead, Shannon.
Sure. Okay. Awesome. Let's see if I can get my screen pulled up here. Thank you. All right. And I am hoping that everyone can see this.
We can.
Darla,
Yep.
yeah, okay, perfect. Perfect. Okay, great. So Darla did a little bit of an introduction there. I'll just go over, touch on my background as well. But today we're going to be talking about some tips on navigating the grocery store. So if this picture is you in a grocery store, I think this will be helpful for you. So um, again, just a little bit of background on myself. Like Darla mentioned, I graduated from the University of Missouri in 2009 with Bachelor's of Health Science and Master's of Physical Therapy. And I have worked for over 15 years as a physical therapist, primarily in an outpatient orthopedic setting. So sorry, I really can't answer a lot of neurological questions here. But in 2018 was when I started having symptoms related to the CCM. And at that time, of course, I really didn't know what they were, and they're just sporadic. In 2019, I'd say things started getting a little more consistent, a little more intense. Started having some really wicked deja vu, which I know some people here can relate to that feeling. And then, of course, we know how 2020 went. And then finally in 2021, I decided, you know what? Some weird stuff is still going on. I should go see a doctor. And I actually had just moved to Greenville, South Carolina in 2018 and had not even established a doctor here. So I decided to do that and didn't get any answers for those symptoms. However, I did come away from that visit finding out that I had those thyroid nodules, which sent me into more investigation. Got testing done and did find out that one was suspicious of cancer. So I was seeing an endocrinologist surgeon at that point in time. But that's when I actually had the hemorrhagic stroke from the CCM and from the lesion. Now, of course, like most people, I think on this call, a lot of people can relate to it. At the time, we actually did not know what was going on. The bleed was covering up the lesion. So it took a while to uncover that. I think it was maybe about a month later, I actually got sought out another opinion from a neurovascular surgeon in another city. And she's the one that helped me identify that. And then from there, that's when I would say, go online, start researching like we all do, right? And that's where I found the Alliance to Cure and started getting plugged in with all of their information. So along that course, though, too, I was doing tons of research at that point, looking at thyroid health, looking at cancer, looking at brain health, and then, about the CCM. And it was just, it all kind of came together so nicely, especially after getting on the Alliance to Cure's website and learning about leaky gut and the connection to that and the CCM. So I started seeing all of these patterns. And I decided also just to get further certifications, because at that time I was working as a physical therapist and realizing that I would say every day I was seeing people and multiple people that were just struggling and dealing with chronic health problems, and they're asking the questions like, what can I do in my day-to-day life? What can I do with my behaviors, my habits that can help me with my health? And really, unfortunately, as medical providers, that's not our area of expertise necessarily. So I decided to do these certifications both to help myself and learn more for myself, as well as to help my patients in the clinic that I was seeing every day that were asking these types of questions. So, all right. So in today's webinar, what we're going to do is we're going to go through and define the spectrum of whole foods versus processed foods. We'll go through tips on navigating the grocery store. We'll go through decoding food labels and some tools to help, and then also some tips to save time and money. And then at the end, we'll wrap up with some practice examples, and then I will gladly take questions. So I think we'll start here. I want to start with just some definitions. Not that it's necessary to have these memorized, but as I go through the presentation, I think it'll be helpful to have a better understanding of these. So whole foods, so this is a spectrum of whole foods versus processed foods. So it isn't just completely black and white. It is kind of, there's some gray area in there as well. So whole foods are once living plants and animals. They're close to their original state. Typically, you can find them around the perimeter of most grocery stores. Think about like your fresh produce, your meats, your eggs, and they generally don't have a food label or ingredient list. Or if it does have an ingredient list, it's going to be like one item, so it's just chicken and that's it. But you think of like an apple, it doesn't have an ingredient list on it. Then we have minimally processed foods. So those may have a short ingredient list that consists mostly of recognizable whole foods. So you can think of like frozen veggies, canned beans, still, generally good options. They're just made in a way that they might preserve, stay on the shelf a little bit longer, but generally still are going to have some beneficial nutrients in them. Maybe just a little bit more convenient for us. And then we'll get into your processed foods. So the processed foods have been modified from their original state, and now they're bringing in the added ingredients such as the sugar, salts, fats and oils, the emulsifiers that we talk about that can are linked to leaky gut, and also additional preservatives. They often contain fewer nutrients, and then they have additional calories. They're going to typically have a longer ingredient list. And now this is where you're kind of getting on looking at the ingredient list and you're not recognizing some of these foods or the words, I guess I should say, that are on there. And they're also going to bring in more artificial ingredients. And then in processed and ultra processed, so there is a little bit of a difference there. But again, I don't think it's necessary to have that memorized and it's not always clear. But ultra-processed foods are usually going to have a very long ingredient list with many unrecognizable additives, refined oils, again, emulsifiers, artificial ingredients, preservatives, and I have dyes, colors. And these things are typically found in the middle aisles of the grocery store. If you think about it, they're the things that can sit on a shelf oftentimes and just sit there forever, and they won't necessarily expire or go bad for quite a while. So just a quick example so you can kind of see and visualize that spectrum a bit better. So an apple, so we take that in the whole food form, and that's going to be full of fiber, vitamins, nutrients, and antioxidants. An example of an apple in its minimally processed form would be unsweetened applesauce. So still a pretty good option. It might be jarred, so it might be a little bit convenient. You can keep it in your pantry for a while. But it has less, you're losing some of the fiber, so which is gut healthy also, than that whole apple. I notice it says unsweetened applesauce and not sweetened. And sometimes I've seen some of the applesauce that has colors to it too. So I would move that down to processed if that were the case. But a different example of processed would be apple juice, where now most of the fiber and the nutrients are actually stripped away and they're lost, leaving primarily the sugar. And even sometimes, if you read the labels on there, you'll see that added sugar is even, or it's added in addition to what's already there. And then an example of ultra processed, so that would be like Apple Jack cereal. So pretty far removed from the original apple. I don't even know. I assume it has some apple in it, but I'm not sure. You look at it, you don't see an apple at all. And then it's also going to be loaded with sugar, artificial ingredients, other unhealthy ingredients. So really low in nutritional value and very far removed from the apple itself. Hopefully that gives you kind of an idea of that spectrum. And so now that we have that defined, we'll talk about just kind of navigating around the grocery store. And maybe you've heard the phrase before, shop the perimeter. So, shop the perimeter is exactly, what it sounds, just staying around the outside part of the store. So if you think about, you go into the store and most of them are set up in a similar way. You're going to have, the items that have to be refrigerated around the outside, and those are going to be more of your whole foods with the shorter shelf life. So think, you have your produce, you have your meat and seafood section, you have your eggs and dairy, so all along kind of that outer wall. And then we also have now in the middle aisles, that's where you're going to find most of the processed foods. Again, those are the things that typically can just sit there on the shelf, don't have to be refrigerated, and they can stay there for a long time. You can bring it home, put it in your pantry. So ideally, if you're shopping the perimeter, you're going to be getting more of the whole foods. And that should be probably a good portion of where you should stay. But there are definitely some exceptions to that in both directions there. So one example on the perimeter of this store, I was actually just looking at this, knowing this webinar was coming up, I was looking at this past weekend and noticing, especially over there in like the deli or the, I guess, processed meat section. So you have all kinds of some processed meats, lunch meats, and I saw some other, meals that you could just heat up. That's like macaroni and cheese. So although it is found on the perimeter, that still isn't probably the best option. Certainly not a whole food. And then in the middle aisle, there are also a lot of great options. So some good staples that are minimally processed. For example, you can find like your spices in the middle aisles generally, and spices are great for adding a lot of flavor. They even actually, a lot of the spices have nutrients in them that provide a lot of health benefits. You can think of things like your healthy oils, like your olive oil. You can think of like nuts and seeds, your quinoa and rice. So those things are going to be found in the middle aisles, but really still are, good options. And we all have to have some good staples in our pantry too. All right. And now we'll get into start to talk about here reading nutrition labels. And I will say this takes time and takes some practice. So if you are new to this and you're feeling a little overwhelmed, know that is normal. It really does take a little bit of practice. I certainly am not perfect. I am learning things all the time myself. Now, with the label, we're going to talk about the top part of the label, or it generally shows up on the top part of the label first, and then we'll talk about the bottom part. And the top part, I don't even necessarily always look at this for everything I buy, depending on what my goal is. But I do think there's some key points here that are just good to know. And one of them was I would look at the serving size and the number of servings per container. I think that can actually be a little bit tricky because sometimes you might buy something, like you might buy a drink or a bag of chips or crackers or something, and figure, okay, well, based on the size of it, it should be, you would think it would be one serving. But it's not always. Sometimes you have to look at the label and then you realize, okay, well, it's actually two servings. So if you are paying attention to the calories or maybe to some of the other macronutrients, the fats, the carbs, and the proteins and sugar, which is a macronutrient but falls under carbs. So if you are paying attention to those things and then you realize, oh, it's actually two servings, you'd have to double all of those numbers. And so that does get a little bit tricky. And I think, just what companies think should be a serving isn't always what I think should be a serving, or isn't what my servings are. Maybe that's how I should put it. So, and then just in general also, so on that left side, you're going to have those nutrients listed in grams. Then on the right side, that percent of the daily value, I honestly don't typically look at that for myself because it's specific to a 2000 calorie diet, which really all of us are going to be very different in our caloric needs. So unless you know exactly that that is what you need, I don't find that percent of the daily value really that helpful. Again, so if you are looking at some of the other macronutrients, I would probably look at the left side of that label instead. And then now, okay, that's right. I wanted to talk about one of the other things that is on that top part, and that's sugar, because this is something I think is a pretty big topic. It's something that I get asked about a lot, and I do hear a lot of people talking about this, which I think for a good reason. And this isn't, and actually all these things that I'm saying here are not cavernoma specific necessarily. They're just generally general health recommendations or just generally good habits. So getting into the sugar part, the sugar is going to be listed under your carbohydrates. And if you notice now, they have to have the total sugar plus the added sugar has to be on the labels as well. So your total sugar is your naturally occurring sugar plus your added sugar. So let's say if you had maybe like a jar of jelly or jams or preserves or something like that that has fruit in it, and then maybe it has additional sugar added to it. Anytime you have something like fruit, that's going to have naturally occurring sugar there. But then the added sugar you should see in addition that's on that ingredient list. So that's where it's going to be broken down. And the American Heart Association's recommendations for added sugar daily is for men is less than 36 grams a day, and for women is less than 25 grams a day. So that adds up quickly if you have not paid attention to that before. And I will say things like drinks. So we'll go over this example here in a second. And condiments and sauces, dressings, it can start to add up pretty quickly, and it's can be surprising, I guess, how much you can find in there. So for our example here, for our Starbucks Frappuccino, you'll notice that just that one drink, so it is one serving for that one bottle, but that one has 32 grams of added sugar. So if you look at that number, for women, we're already over that number. And for men, you're pretty darn close to that. Right. Now we'll get into the part that I would say this is really, if I'm looking at it, something that does have a label, this is where I'm going to spend most of my time and probably be the biggest deciding factor in if I purchase it or not. So this is the ingredient list. This is also, I think, the trickiest part of it as well. So just know that the ingredients are listed from largest to smallest amount that's in that product. And it can include it should include your additives, your emulsifiers, your colors, dyes, artificial, natural flavors, preservatives, spices, more. There's actually thousands of ingredients that can potentially be added to our food, at least here in the US. I don't know if anyone happens to be on here from other countries. In fact, some other countries, I know Canada and over in Europe have some tighter restrictions on a lot of the things that can be added in. But there are like pretty much 1,000 different or thousands of different ingredients. So really, I think I don't spend too much time trying to memorize these things. And with the clients that I work with also, I don't focus on memorizing all these ingredients. Now, if you want to go for it, maybe good brain exercise, I guess that'd be a challenge. And there's maybe some that you see more of that you'll recognize, be good to get to know. But another reason I actually don't spend a lot of time trying to memorize these is ultimately, if you are focusing on eating your whole foods or maybe minimally processed foods, just naturally, you're not going to be getting all of these other ingredients in there. So it's really kind of twofold. You'll be taking away, a lot of the added ingredients that might be bad for you. And also, I do want to say, not all of the ingredients on the list, if you don't recognize it, it doesn't mean that it is unhealthy. Some might be just fine. Um, but then also, if you're focusing on the whole foods and minimally processed foods, you're also getting a lot of nutrition out of those as well. So again, and just a tip for that again would be looking at that label. If you're trying to decide on a few things, maybe looking at products that are generally going to have fewer and the more recognizable ingredients. So we know what coffee is, for example, or if it says cinnamon on there. So those words that are real whole foods. And also too, I do just want to make a point that you don't have to be perfect with this. I think it's really, really easy to get caught up in all of this. But I think especially in our modern world, it is quite a challenge to try to be perfect. And there is a lot of convenience from bringing in some of those minimally processed foods and even sometimes some of those processed foods as well. So, okay. Now, just another strategy too. If you've been around here for a while in the Alliance to Cures group, you've probably heard of the Fig app, and if you haven't, it's a great app. And what you can do, so the Fig app lets you set up your personal preferences. So once you go into it, for example, it has an option for selecting emulsifier-free foods. And then if you have any other like allergies or things or food preferences, you can select those on there also. And then you can just take that with your phone and you can scan the barcode. And I admit, I hadn't been on the Fig app probably in a couple of years. I think they've done some really nice updates with that. And, again, another reason why I don't spend a lot of time trying to memorize every ingredient is, products change, brands change, and we have tools like the Fig app that can really be nice for helping us out with that as well. So, and I guess I already mentioned this, but another just strategy for the labels is just trying to, stick with the shorter ingredient list and seeing if you can recognize a lot of the items that are listed on there. And then one other resource, I did want to bring this up as well. If you haven't already seen the Alliance to Cure, they have on their website, they have some great information if you do want to dig into the emulsifiers a little bit more. So they have an common emulsifier list, emulsifier-free foods, and then even a sheet with emulsifier scores. So, and on that sheet, they have it color coded with the green, the yellow, and the red on there. So, if you're interested in that, I highly recommend checking those out. Those are really, really nice resources. And in addition to that, too, if you're interested in a lot of the nutrition, there's at least two, Darla will have to correct me if I'm wrong here, there might be more, but at least two other webinars on their YouTube channel. One's talking about leaky gut, and one is talking about emulsifiers. So those are really, really great resources. In fact, I've listened to them a couple times and just, got something else out of them. Sometimes it takes a couple times of listening to get everything. So next, we'll talk about a few strategies to eat healthy on a busy schedule. This is just a topic that I think is important. It's questions that I get a lot with my, usually with my patients, now my clients. I think we can all relate to this. And maybe even also for this group, I understand that, if you're not feeling well, physically, you might not be able to prepare every meal from, whole foods for yourself and for your family. So there definitely are a few strategies I think that can make it easier for you to still get healthy food if you are busy or if you can't physically take the time to cook a lot. So maybe some of you guys have noticed already when you are in the produce section, I've seen this in almost most all stores now. There's usually a good selection of like pre-cut fresh veggies over there. So those are a really great option. I like, for veggies, something easy to do. You take those, you can mix them into a soup. And then even if you make a whole batch of soup, that can be easy just to freeze some that you don't use. We put some in mason jars, put them in the freezer, and then, on a busy night or a night that you don't feel well, something easy that you can just take out and heat back up again. So the pre-sliced produce is a good option. In addition, frozen veggies, frozen berries, so those also still are going to have nutritional value to them, and they can be a lot easier. And really, I think the frozen veggies can be a little bit cheaper too. So if you are on a budget, that might be helpful as well. And then I'm seeing more and more. I don't know about you guys, but I'm seeing more and more stores, and not even, not your Whole Food stores, not your Trader Joe's, not your Earth Fairs, just regular grocery stores that have these options for these pre-made meals that are actually, still the whole foods, and you just got to heat them up again. And they're not the pre-frozen ones either. So those can be a nice option to have around. They're definitely cheaper than eating out, probably more expensive than if you were to make it yourself. These examples that I have up here, I think they're like $5 or $6 or something like that. So, certainly something that I've seen more and more of in the grocery stores. And then I kind of hit on this earlier, but if you do have an opportunity to do some meal prepping and cooking, that's one of my strategies. I don't like cooking every night for dinner. So I generally am going to take a night, and when I make something, I'm going to just go ahead and plan on making enough leftovers for at least 2 or 3 meals for us. So perfect. We'll move on to also just a few strategies for eating healthy on a budget. Because I know everything is very expensive these days, and yes, eating healthier generally is going to be more expensive than say buying like a box of Kraft macaroni and cheese. But I do also like to consider maybe the long-term effect of that. I like to think that doing these things preventatively and for my health is also potentially going to save some money, in the future, maybe on medical bills. And just generally also, it's something I know for myself, I really put value in feeling well. I know this is a part of it for me. So, but a few strategies here. One would be, how every store they come out with an ad every week, and they have different things that go on sale. So just following the store's sales and then maybe planning some meals around those, so that can help save you a bit of money. In addition to saving money too, it's actually, I think another benefit to doing that is you're going to be getting a lot of variety of foods, and especially on the produce side, with your fruits and vegetables. All of our plants have these things called polyphenols, which are basically chemicals that are naturally occurring in the plants that are very healthy for us. So, and sometimes when we call it a synergistic effect, meaning you eat multiple plants or you get these combination of these different plant chemicals, they can actually have even additional health benefits. So, maybe just a quick example you might have heard of is with like turmeric, and if you add black pepper to it, it actually increases the bioavailability, meaning the amount of usable nutrients from that turmeric or from the curcumin, that's the polyphenol in turmeric. So it kind of increases some of those anti-inflammatory properties that your body can use there. So, so it's a nice to just be able to follow the sales there. And you might even find something, I know I found a few foods that I never really would have tried. So you have to be a little bit brave. Internet's great for looking up some recipes for that type of thing. And you might find something else that you really like also. And another strategy here is if you guys are like me, maybe when you see something that's on sale, like in the meat section, they have like a sell by date on them. So I definitely will, when I see like my organic free range chicken go on sale, and if they have 4 or so of those marked down, I just go ahead and buy them and I'll stick them in the freezer. And then, because I know I'm going to use it, I'll stick them in the freezer. And then when I do want to use it, I'll just go ahead and pull it out and thaw it. So that can be a nice way to save a little money if you get lucky there. And sometimes you can figure out what the schedule is for the store near you. I know mine seem to go Monday and Tuesdays when they seem to mark those down. So you can find out what works for you. And then also, so some stores like Lidl and Aldi, I know this is just depends on your location, but they can be a bit cheaper as well. And they tend to also rotate through some of their foods. So that's kind of nice to try some new things there. And then Sam's and Costco, I think that's pretty obvious, but you can buy some nice things in bulk there. I know their produce as well as, some of those other staple items, maybe like if you like quinoa rice, those types of things, your olive oils, might be nice to get there, and especially if you have a family. So if you have one of those nearby. And I did want to say also too, so if this is a little bit off topic from the budget part of it, but there are now some online stores like Thrive Market. So if you don't have like a store nearby um, to get maybe some of these healthier options, there are those stores online that you can go and purchase products. And then also what's nice is they just go ahead and it shows up at your house. So that's kind of pretty convenient too. Or if you physically maybe can't go into the grocery stores very often. So, all right. Okay, so I have a few examples here, and then I will get to some questions after that. I want to just kind of put together some of what I had mentioned here, just some practical examples. And so this is the same brand. This is actually almond butter, and a brand that I would typically buy. And one day I said, you know what, let me go ahead and just look at the labels here. So in comparison, the one on the left is that's the one that you have to stir. As you can see, the kind of the separation at the top there. And then the one on the right is the no stir version. And I really just didn't assume there would be much of a difference. And it's not a huge difference in them. But this is an example of, a minimally processed food. It still can be a great option. All of your nut butters can. But if you look at the ingredient list here, the one that you do have to stir up, the only ingredient on there is dry roasted almonds. That's it. If we go over to the other one, the no stir one, you have dry roasted almonds, palm oil, organic sugar, sea salt. I think that's it over there. I kind of cut it off. So I was a little bit surprised at that. And, and those aren't awful ingredients, but for myself, again, I try to, minimize those. And especially like those, that's where just an example of how that sugar can just get kind of snuck into things that you don't always expect. I don't know. I cut it off there. I'm not sure how much sugar it had on this one, but again, just something that just looking at the front of that jar, you wouldn't have necessarily known. All right, let's see. Okay. So for another example here, we like having coconut milk in our house. So we like making some curry, lots of good flavors in those, lots of good spices. And again, one day I decided, you know what, let me just go ahead and compare these items. And I, just looking at the front of them, I didn't expect there really to be any difference. And I was just going to buy whichever one was cheapest and on sale, right? So looking at, just as you compare them, the one on the left there, the ingredients, you got the coconut extract, water, guar gum, sucrose esterase, sodium carboxymethyl cellulose. So I thought, well, that sure is interesting. And then the middle one, definitely better. We got our coconut water and guar gum. And then the one on the right there, you got just coconut and water. So just an example of, how one product just in the different brands can have these different ingredients. So I'm speaking of saving money, I know this is a staple I like to have, which by the way is also minimally processed. You find it in the middle aisles. But whenever I see like the Blue Dragon brand, I know at the store near me, they go on sale like once a month or something like that. So whenever I see that, I usually just buy a couple or a few of them to have around. All right. So I think I have one more example here, and then we'll get to some questions. So this is an example actually of the shop the perimeter where, there are some exceptions to that and where you can find processed foods on the perimeter of the store. So on the far left here, we have bologna, and I think it had added cheese or something like that in it. As you can see, it has a very long list of ingredients in it, and some things in there that I personally try to stay away from, like corn syrup. Some of those, I'm not sure what those ingredients are. And this is an example too, actually. If you do look at the left side of the label, just look at the sodium content on there, compared to our other meats, so really high in sodium. I know we didn't talk about that specifically for numbers. And if you go up to the serving size, it's only one slice. So that's, another example where maybe, looking at those numbers may make a difference. But again, this would not be a product I would necessarily choose just because of the ingredients list. And you compare that with the middle one, which is something that I have eaten a lot of this particular brand of lunch meat in my life. And I have never looked at the ingredient list, to be honest, until lately. But, so one thing that jumped out, this is just your regular deli lunch meat, that's already prepackaged back there. And actually what surprised me was that carrageenan was on this list, and that is an emulsifier. If you can find the list of the emulsifiers on the Line Secures website, carrageenan is one of them that is in the red. So just a note there. Then we compare it to on the right side. I know, sorry, that's kind of hard to see over there, but that is just plain old, it might have been my chicken actually that I had my other example on sale. So just boneless, skinless breast with rib meat. So it doesn't actually have an ingredient list. It's just your whole food. And really what I do now too is, if I want to make up a wrap, or I put these on my salad, or I don't often have sandwiches, but if I do have a sandwich, I'd probably just bake the chicken, and then slice it up and use that meat. And I suspect there are other deli meats that are probably better than, those other examples on here. So, okay. And I think that is, yeah. Okay. So that is what I have. And we'll gladly go over some questions here.
Awesome. Thank you, Shannon. We do have some questions in the chat. And I have a question. I wrote it down. Let me see. Um,
Perfect.
Talking about sugar, what do you think about like cane sugar versus honey, agave? I use dates a lot to sweeten things, or maple
Yeah.
syrup.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So there's and sugar also, we didn't go into this too far, and I have to admit I don't know every single sweetener that's out there, but you certainly have your groups of more natural sugars. So like dates would be, it's more of a whole food, honey, agave, like your maple syrups that are, so those I would put as better options for sweeteners for sure, versus then you also have your like artificial sweeteners. So those like your sweet and low, that type of thing. Um, those there is some research on those showing that they can have just some negative health effects. And then we also kind of have this newer area of some of these like non-caloric sweeteners as well. And I know I don't know all of the research on there, but like you have your stevia, which is a more natural one. But even stevia, it's my understanding that even stevia can be processed to a degree. So if you're looking for that, trying to find like a organic whole leaf stevia is actually probably your better option there. So it kind of goes back to that spectrum of still of like, okay, is it whole versus getting more processed? So that can get into the sweeteners as well. But yeah, definitely I like those options that you mentioned earlier as those kind of natural sweeteners.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. This person is saying they really like fruits and vegetables, but they have a hard time knowing the serving size for them, since obviously they don't have a food label on, like you were saying, on an apple. So how do they measure that out?
I guess my question would be that's hard to answer because I guess everybody would have different goals, maybe. So some people like to balance their diets a little bit differently, and there really isn't a one size fits all. This is the amount, this is the number of servings for everybody. So how do you measure it out there? Yeah, I guess I'd have to know a little bit more information about that. I mean, there are ways like you can't, it depends, I get this just depends on what you're looking for. So like, are you looking for the fiber content? Are you looking for the sugar? Are you just looking for the carbs? Yeah, so I guess it depends. And there are on apps though. I mean, you can find like if you do, like My Fitness Pal, you can type in like an apple and it'll give you kind of, you have to guess on what size it is, unless you want to weigh it and measure it that way. And then it'll kind of break down um, the nutrients in it for you that way. So I'm not sure if that answers that question or not, but
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think a tracking app and finding out what you need for your own body is probably, yeah, like you said, everyone's different, right?
yeah.
All right. Hang on. I had one and now I lost it. What do you think about this push towards protein? There's a lot of talk about like we need more protein, we need more protein. What's your take on that? Are there certain phases of life where we might need more protein?
Great question. And I would say, um, first, I'm not a researcher on protein specifically. But I agree that that is definitely protein is kind of the macronutrient of the moment right now. And it varies. And just like the last question too, I mean, it really is something that is more individualized that can depend on how active you are. That can depend. Some people, if you are healing or if you have an injury, your body really does need more protein. So that protein has um, the amino acids in it, and there are essential amino acids that we absolutely do need from your diet, and you can get those from plant or animal sources. It is a little harder to get all of them from if you're on a plant-based diet, but you can do it. So I would say it is an essential macronutrient. How much of it, again, just really varies. Yeah, so I guess it just depends on your activity level. It is essential though. So if you'd like, there are general guidelines for that, and I actually have them close by here. So for sedentary adults, the bottom range is zero point 0.8 grams per kilogram. And for active adults, it can go up to about 2.2 grams per kilogram, which is closer to 1 gram per pound of body weight for like if you are an active adult. So again, so it can really depend. And to the other question, there is research that shows that as you age, to help maintain lean muscle mass, that it is actually important to increase your protein intake, and also actually after injuries as well.
Thanks, Shannon.
Yeah.
All right. Can you explain trans fats, saturated fats, what are good fats?
Yeah, so there's definitely, I'll try. How about that? I'll try to do it. There's definitely a variety of fats. And when you're on if you're reading on the label, you're going to have, your total fat on there, which is going to include your saturated fats and then potentially your monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. And then I do believe it's required now to also put your trans fats. So I'll start at the bottom with the trans fats. So your trans fats and hydrogenated oils and fats are essentially ones that are more processed. Research shows that those are not good for us. So those really are ones that you want to essentially avoid. And then Your saturated fats, so those you can get saturated fats from whole food sources. Um, the amounts that you get of that, though, you definitely want those to be balanced out. And if you are someone who has like a risk of cardiovascular disease, you may want to minimize those. That'd be something good. That's again more of a, I guess, a personalized answer for that. And then you have more of your monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. And those are and those can be found as like nuts and seeds. And the chemical bond is just different there. The so, and when you think of, this is another question, I'm trying to figure out how to navigate all of this and explain it in a way that I can. When you also get into the like omega-6s and omega-3s that we hear about being healthy fats, or omega-3s are more of your anti-inflammatory. Omega-6s are still healthy, just sometimes we get those in an imbalance, they're more pro-inflammatory. So those kind of fit under the polyunsaturated fats. So the names of those depend on the chemical bond to them and how stable they are. So you're saturated, one more point on that, saturated fats will typically be like a solid at room temperature versus your unsaturated, like an olive oil, would be more liquid. So I'm not sure if that answers that question, but there's a lot of things you can start to get into there with the fats, and some of it goes beyond, honestly, my knowledge and expertise there.
Got it. Um, can you comment on the importance of drinking quality water?
Oh, good one. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's great. No, that's interesting. I didn't expect that question to come up, but actually I'm glad it did, because there is our body needs water. And I heard someone say one time, you can either ingest these ingredients and let your body try to filter them out, or you can try to filter them out before you go in. And I think that applies for water. So if you have not done this, or you don't know about this, the environmental working group had on their website, they have a database where you can actually look up what's in your tap water. So I typically actually do talk to my clients about that. And you might be surprised at what is in your water. On their website also, they have a list of filters, and then a reverse osmosis is kind of the gold standard for a filter that filters out most all of the pollutants in there. Even I think plastics, because that is something else that was being found in a lot of water. And actually also in like thinking of quality water, the bottled water that is sitting in plastic water bottles, a lot of that has been shown to have some of those microplastics in them. And especially, a lot of times they're stored maybe in sunshine that makes that plastic break down, and it can leach into the water. So absolutely. I mean, it's another, water is critical for our body, and we certainly want to put a cleaner source in there. Yeah, absolutely, if possible.
Someone in the chat asked, how does this all pertain to CCM?
Oh, great question. Well, so I'm not a CCM expert, although I do have one, but I think this would be a great, if that person or anyone else has not looked at um, the couple other webinars. So there's one specifically on leaky gut. So our gut health has been shown, actually it's really shown to be linked to the health of most all of our body. So what we eat and our food can directly influence the health of our gut. Plus, again, just our overall health, how we heal. And even if we don't have CCM, the nutrients that we eat in our food help fuel our brain, for example. So um, so our habits, just the day-to-day things that we do during the day, so how we're going around shopping, what we're doing at the stores, what we put in our mouth and in our gut, can actually affect and maybe I should take a step back here too, that the research has shown with poor health or leaky gut, it can potentially create a bleed. And Darla, correct me if I'm wrong on that part, because again, I'm not a CCM expert, but there has been shown to be a link between leaky gut and
Yeah,
cavernomas
it has to do with gram-negative bacteria getting
bacteria.
out of the
Yeah.
gut. There's lots of good information on our website that explains it probably better than I can. I'll drop the link in the chat, and I also put the link to those other two webinars in the chat if you want to go back and check them out.
And I'll say also, so leaky gut is not unique to cavernomas. So it's definitely a condition that actually um, has been associated with many different chronic diseases. And what you eat in your diet is a critical part of that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you have any tips for dining out?
Oh, okay. Yeah. And actually, I'm glad someone just asked that because I just saw recently that the Fig app actually they are about to start to put some restaurants on their app. So maybe that could be a tip. But I hear you there with that. So oftentimes you don't know what's included in restaurants, foods like in their sauces and things. But I think there's usually if you go to a restaurant, I mean, you can look on the menu and, you know, there's going to be something healthy, I like to say, at almost every restaurant. So maybe choosing foods like that have some vegetables with it, that has like a meat with it. Those are usually better options. Um, if you I like to also like when I'm traveling, I like to like if I know I'm going to be in an area, I like to look at the menu ahead of time for places so I kind of know what my options are. Um, let's see. And I mean, I guess you could always, I guess servers probably don't know exactly what's in all, the specific ingredients in it. But you could try to ask, see if they know or could give you more information on that as well. And yeah, I guess I just try to stick with the some of the ingredients that I know in general should be a bit cleaner. But I do also think it's important to realize that we don't have to be perfect all the time. And again, I'm glad this question came up because I have seen some people um, almost get so fearful about eating something that they shouldn't eat that it creates a little more isolation to where they don't want to go out and don't want to be social, but those aspects are really important for our health and well-being too. So we certainly don't you don't have to be perfect, but I think if you are eating out, maybe look ahead, or if you are going somewhere where you're like, I don't think these are great options for me, have a little snack before, or I mean, salads are generally good. Or get your veggies and meat if you
Yeah.
eat meat. So yeah.
And Chipotle, just heads up if you are traveling, Chipotle is actually surprisingly clean. That's one of the ones that when we were looking at where you can like, there's really no like fast food restaurant that's gonna be clean, um,
Right.
but Chipotle is surprisingly good, so that might be an option if you're really trying to eat clean on the road. But I mean, I really liked Shannon when you said you don't have to be perfect all the time. I think just trying to be as good as you can when you can and not make yourself completely crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Um,
Darla, that's a good point too about Chipotle. I think I'm seeing a lot more restaurants also. So like if you have a choice where you're going, like there are a lot more kind of health focused restaurants, a lot of them where you can kind of create your own bowl or something like that, choose your sauces. And I mean, I'm seeing a lot more of those with the fresh ingredients kind of pop up, but I'm sure that just depends on where you live and what you have available around you.
yeah, I would agree. There are still a lot of really good questions in the chat, and we are running low on time because we do have support group. So we're going to wrap it up. If you have a question about emulsifiers, I see several of those. Send me an email. My email is darla@alliancetocure.org, and I can answer the emulsifier questions. Um, all right, let's end with Oh, there's so many good ones left. All right. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm really indecisive right now. Um, let's go with what's your opinion on organic foods versus like not organic? Are there some things that you
Yeah.
absolutely should go for in an organic version and others it doesn't matter as much?
Yeah, great question. And that's another one I like to reference going back to the environmental working group. They put out a list. It's called the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15 as far as your produce goes. Another place too where you can maybe save a little bit of money. So as far as the produce part of it, I do try to stay by that. So your Dirty Dozen are the top 12 foods that have been tested and have the most pesticides on them. And then the clean 15 are the ones that are the cleanest. If you don't have that list in front of you, kind of a good rule is if it's something that has like a hard shell on it, so like think a banana, think an avocado, it probably is going to be on like the clean 15. It's probably going to be cleaner. So, there might not be a big difference between organic versus not there. Things like berries, I do go organic with those as best as possible. Again, I'm not perfect with that. Um, so, and or organic just as a label in general too is a little bit tricky because just because something is organic doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy. So if it's in another product, it's actually a really good point. If it's in another product, like maybe a bag of chips or crackers, and it says organic, I'm looking at the ingredient list on that anyways. I've seen organic something with 15 grams of added sugar in a serving, which is more than I do. So that label can be tricky. But I would go to, as far as produce goes, I'd go to the Dirty Dozen and Clean 15 list.
That's a great tip. Thank you, Shannon. All right.
Yeah.
We are at time, so we're gonna call it. I know there's still good questions in the chat, and I'm sorry we didn't get to them all. But thank you guys all for participating and engaging. You've been an awesome audience, and thank you so much, Shannon, for sharing your knowledge with us, and your journey. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks. And you guys can send me a message too. I think you can probably connect them in the Facebook group. So if there's a burning question left, feel free to reach out. So.
Yeah, that's great. We appreciate